Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much for being here. Before we start, I would like you to give a round of applause to the most important people here, yourselves. Yay! Because if you weren't here, we would feel pretty foolish. So thank you for being here. Before we start with the music and the storytelling, there's a little bit of housekeeping we have to take care of. It's kind of a good news, bad news kind of a situation. You know, this time of year, safety dictates that we be very, very careful about ghosts and goblins. Now, fortunately, Suzanne and I got here early this afternoon. We rounded up all the ghosts and the goblins except for one or two, and we got them stuffed into a room locked in the basement. All right, I hid in the broom closet, and Susanna rounded up all the ghosts and goblins and then got them locked into a room. One or two of them seem to have escaped. So if any of you should disappear during the evening, or if I make any mistakes, it's the ghosts and goblins' fault. The other thing is that takes care of the ghosts and goblins, but we also have to worry about vampires and werewolves. So, in order to protect ourselves from the vampires and werewolves, we have some garlic. Here's some garlic here to protect Susanna and the organ. And here is some garlic for this half of the hall. And here is some garlic for this half of the hall. Very good. Now, for those of you who are wondering why I'm not keeping any garlic for myself, first of all, thank you for your concern. Secondly, that question presumes that I am not, in fact, a werewolf. And the only thing that I can say about that is before I came down here this evening, I was bald and had just shaved. So, Susanna is about to start playing. Thank you again for all being here. Some years ago, on a dark and snowy and stormy, windy night in the winter, on the western slope of the Carpathian Mountains in Eastern Europe, Ulrich von Gladwitz was hunting with his rifle. It was the time of year when deer ran through these woods of his, and to catch a deer was important because with a deer, a man could feed his family for weeks. But on this night, Ulrich was not hunting deer. He was hunting his neighbor, Klaus Dragos. Several generations earlier, Klaus's family had attempted to steal this strip of land from Ulrich's family. The matter had gone to the district court, which had awarded the land back to Ulrich's family. But the animosity and the anger that had started then had deepened into real hatred over the succeeding generations, to the point where now Ulrich and Klaus, when they went to the small town near their homes, shopped at different stores, crossed the street to avoid each other, drank in different bars. The people of the town knew that if they should meet by accident, they would stand back for fear of whatever violence might ensue. So Ulrich was hunting through the woods hoping he would run into Klaus, because he knew that no court in the district would convict him of whatever he did if he were to be able to catch Klaus poaching or stealing, as he referred to it, on his land. So imagine his surprise when he came around a stand of trees and found himself face to face with Klaus, also holding a rifle. We might expect that they would step back and shoot each other and put an end to it all, but their immediate anger was so visceral that they tossed their guns aside and flew at each other with fists and feet. And they fought and they rolled and they fought and they threw each other side to side. They stopped and paused for breath, and then they flew at each other again, striking each other and throwing each other against the trees. And at one point they were lying a few feet away from each other, trying to summon the strength to get back up and fight some more, but they never got the chance. What they had failed to notice was that the wind had picked up and had blown a huge birch branch off of the tree that it was attached to, and it fell across both of them, pinning them hopelessly to the ground under hundreds of pounds of wood and knocking them senseless. When Ulrich woke up a few minutes later, he took stock of the situation. He couldn't move at all. And then he heard laughter. And he looked over at Klaus and he said, "Klaus, what are you laughing at?" "I'm laughing at you, you fool. You've protected this stupid piece of land all these years, and now your trees can't even stand up straight." And Ulrich said, "I'll tell you what, Klaus. I have men in these woods looking for me, and if they get to me first, I'll make sure that they free me and they leave you to whatever becomes of you." And Klaus says, "Well, I have men in these woods too, and if they get here first, I wouldn't give a penny for your chances." And so the matter lay for some moments. And Ulrich stopped, lay there and thought for a bit, and then realized he had a flask of brandy in his pocket, and he was able to reach it. So he took it out, and he took a sip, and he took another sip, and he started to feel warmer and better. And then on an impulse, he said, "Klaus, I seem to have some brandy here. If I throw it to you, and you could reach it, it pains me to say this, but you're welcome to have a sip." And Klaus's only response was, "I don't drink with my enemies." That's where the matter lay again. And then after a few moments, Ulrich said, "Klaus, I've been thinking again. We've been fighting over this strip of land for all these years. To what effect? To what benefit to anybody? It's helped neither of us. It's not helped our families. I'll tell you what, if my men come to free us, I will instruct them to free you first. And then, Klaus, I will ask you to be my friend." There was no response for a few moments. And then he heard Klaus laughing again. He said, "Klaus, what are you laughing at now?" "I'm laughing at the thought of you and me walking down the main thoroughfare of the village, arm in arm, telling each other jokes. We go into my bar, I buy you beer. We go into your bar, you buy me a beer. It'll be a wonderful thing. And they both laughed about that and felt great about things. And then Ulrich said, well, if we are to make good on this rapprochement of ours, we had better get found, so let us raise some noise. So for several minutes they yelled and they screamed and they hallooed and they yelled and they screamed, waiting to see if any of their men heard them and were coming. Nothing. Let's try again. They yelled and they screamed some more, and they yelled and they screamed some more. Nothing. But then, even though they could hardly see past the nearest trees, Klaus said, Ulrich, there's some figures. They're coming this way. I think they're coming this way. Yes, I think they are. And Ulrich said, how many of them are there? It looks like there are about 12. Well, they must be your men then. I only had 7 out here with me. Let's yell some more. So they yelled and they yelled and they yelled some more. And then there was silence while they waited for the men to get there. And then Klaus started laughing again. And Ulrich said, Klaus, what are you laughing at now? Are they your men? No, Ulrich, they're not my men. Well, are they my men? No, Ulrich, they're not your men. Well, who are they, Klaus? Who is coming for us? Wolves, Ulrich. It's a pack of wolves coming for us. 1983, I took a break from my job as an attorney in New York City. The city was getting far too busy and loud for me. The horse farms were disappearing from Broadway up above 70th Street. They were talking about putting stones down on the ground of the streets. And we were getting an inundation of that horrible new contraption, the telephone, which was threatening to make slaves of us all. So I went to West Virginia to go grouse hunting. I didn't have any hopes of actually getting any grouse, but the important thing was that I would be able to wander around the hollers and the hills and the woods and the streams, and it was lovely. I went during the early winter. The cold had set in kind of early that year, and one night as I was going back to my inn in Schuylerville, where I had taken a room, the snow was falling, the dark was increasing. I realized that I had become hopelessly lost. I had no sense of compass directions, north, south, east, or west. I had no sense of which way to get back to Schuylerville, where my inn was. I had no sense of how to find a thoroughfare or any kind of habitation. I decided there was nothing for it but to march straight ahead in hopes that I would hit at least a road. So I did. I walked for about an hour. I had started to despair of ever getting out of there that night when I saw a light bobbing ahead of me. I made straight for it and soon found myself standing in front of a man with a woolen coat and heavy boots. And he said, "Well, my goodness, sir, what are you doing out here this time of night?" Well, as you can readily see, I'm quite lost, and I would be grateful for any direction you could give me as to how to get back to Schuylerville, where I have a room in an inn. Schuylerville? You're not going to get down to Schuylerville tonight. That's way too far. You've been going in the entire wrong direction, sir. Well, can you direct me towards the nearest road? The nearest road's not going to help you. That just goes down to Schuylerville. Well, where are you off to? I'm going back to my house where I live and where I work for Mr. Buchanan. Well, then, if you don't mind, I think I'll follow along with you in hopes that I can get some sustenance and warmth. Well, I suppose you might could do that, but Mr. Buchanan's a funny one. He don't take kindly to strangers much. Well, sir, I will take my chances. Please lead on. So we walked, and we got wet and cold. But after about half an hour, we came to a pleasant enough house with bright candlelight coming out of the windows. But I noticed there was no roadway leading up to the house, just this simple footpath that we were on. We walked in the front door, and I found myself in a dark entryway where I took off my wet coat. And then the inner door opened, and a large man in a black frock coat stood there looking down at me somewhat imperiously. And he said, "Well, Thomas, what have you managed to bring home here tonight?" Well, sir, this guy was wandering around out there, and he was hopeless lost. He sure was. So I brought him here because he insisted on getting some kind of a relief, I'll tell you. And Mr. Buchanan stood there and looked at me as if he was trying to decide whether to let me in or throw me back out into the snow. He said, "Very well, come on in. I will share my simple larder with you. It's not much, it's not impressing, but I bet that your hunger will make up for that." So we entered into his large, great room, and I was immediately struck by the walls that were covered with books all around, hundreds and hundreds of volumes that seemed to encompass the entire realm of human knowledge. Art, literature, science, music, languages, religion, everything. And interspersed were medical instruments on these shelves, scientific instruments of all kinds. Most of them, their purpose, I had no idea. Well, we sat down and we ate a very decent dinner of potatoes and sausage and a very fine bottle of port. And Mr. Buchanan told me that he had been in this house for 23 years without entertaining visitors. He had lived alone there. and he asked me about what was going on in the outside world. So I told him about this, that, and the other thing. He was especially interested in the telephone, although he allowed and insisted that no such terrible contraption would ever enter his home. And then I asked him, "Sir, you are obviously well-read, well-learned. Why are you here living the life of a recluse?" "Well, sir, I'll tell you about that. I used to be an important member of many scientific societies. I used to be on the faculty of some very important universities. But I discovered one limitation about modern science, and that is that they don't believe in visions and they don't believe in apparitions. If they can't see it, poke it, stick something into it, put it under a microscope, do an experiment on it, they don't believe in it. And I'll tell you one thing, there's none so blind as those who will not see." All right, I said to myself, this is fine. I asked him, could he give me an example of these visions and apparitions that he was talking about? He sat back and he looked at me for a minute. He said, "No, sir, I don't believe I'm prepared to tell you about that. But you ask Thomas on your way out of here, because Thomas is going to take you down to the road where you can pick up the night coach down to Schuylerville. They call it the Phantom Coach, and he'll tell you why." So Thomas and I left the house and we started walking down towards the road, and I asked Thomas, "Can you please tell me about this Phantom Coach?" He said, "Well, yes, sir. About 9 years ago, this night coach that you're going to get on, which we call the Phantom Coach, was headed down towards Schuylerville. Well, there's a bend in the road just a few miles past where you're going to get on. And around that bend in the road, there's a 4-foot wall, because on the other side of that wall, there's a straight drop. It's 300 foot if it's an inch. And one night, this coach went over that wall and went straight down to the bottom. Everybody on it was killed. There was the driver and there was 4 passengers, all of them. But the strange thing is, only 3 of those passengers' body was ever found. Only 3. Nobody's ever found the 4th body. Sometimes people in the village, when they're out taking walks at night, they'll swear that they see a strange man walking around with no light in his eyes and no discernible movement and purpose to his movement, just wandering around. That's what they say. I think it's all poppycock myself, but that's what they say. Well, here comes your coach. Sure enough, along came the coach. So I thanked Thomas, sent him on his way, and I got into the coach. There were 3 other men on the coach with me. I said, "Well, certainly is cold outside," by way of striking up a conversation. No response. "I think winter is actually kind of set in, certainly by now, right, gentlemen?" No response. I guess they don't like northerners, is what I thought to myself. After a while, even though it was cold, I began to feel stuffy in that carriage. So I said, "Gentlemen, I hope you don't mind if I bring down the window a little bit." No response, but they all 3 turned and looked at me with vacant eyes, but odd grins on their faces. So I proceeded to pull down the window, and the strap came off in my hand. I looked around the coach, the interior, for the first time, and I realized that the entire inside of the carriage was in an advanced stage of dilapidation and deterioration. There were cracks and rips and broken things everywhere I looked. I tapped my foot on the floor, and my foot went clean through the floorboard, and I could see the road going up underneath us. And then the coach lurched to the right. I waited for it to lurch back to the left, but it never did. It kept lurching to the right, and suddenly I felt myself weightless in the carriage, and I realized we were falling, and I looked down, and I saw the rocks coming up to meet us and give us our doom, 300 feet and coming fast, and it was then that I realized that I was the 4th passenger on the Phantom Coach. True story, true story.
Thank you all again so much for being here tonight. I love your costumes. I can't wait to see more of them up close. We have come to the audience participation part of our concert. We will now sing 2 pumpkin carols You will know the tunes, don't fear, and the lyrics are found in your bulletins. So let's stand, let's stretch our legs, and let's sing with all of our enthusiasm. We're going to take about a 10-minute intermission. The costume judges will start surveying for our costume contest. Grab a beverage, and we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes.
The Raven is a story. It's a poem, but it's really a story. It's a story about a man who is lost in despair at the loss of the woman named Lenore. He is sitting in his room late at night. He's got a fire going. He's trying to distract himself with his books and reading, but it's not working very well. Then he's visited by the Raven. And at first he's kind of amused by this, But as the poem goes on, and he kind of starts to lose it a little bit, he realizes that the raven is not there to help him or give him comfort at all. There's a couple of words in here that we're not used to. One is Plutonian shore, that's the underworld between life and death, and another is nepenthe, which goes back to the Greeks. It's a drug to alleviate despair and sadness. So, the raven. Once, upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, suddenly I heard a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, "only this and nothing more." Distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow. Vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door." Presently my soul grew stronger. Hesitating then no longer, "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was nearly napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so gently you came tapping at my chamber door that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore." This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Back into my chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping, somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when, with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the ancient days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door. Perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird, beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven, ghastly, grim, and ancient raven wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon a sculptured bust above his chamber door with such name as Nevermore. But the raven on his lonely perch spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather then he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, "On the morrow he will leave me. All my friends have always left me, as it is and was before." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." But the raven, still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then, upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this ghastly, grim, ungainly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed with an unseen censer swung by seraphim, whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite, respite and nepenthe from these memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden if, within the distant Aden, it shall clasp a rare and sainted maiden whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming. And the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore.
Okay, are you ready for some more pumpkin carols? All right, let's stand.
Saki, H.H. Monroe, actually I can never figure out why he gave himself the pen name Saki, because every time you hear Saki, it's always followed by H.H. Monroe. It's not like we're dealing with Madonna or Beyonce here, but anyway. The Open Window, Saki was a satirist, first and foremost. He told lots of different kinds of stories, but he was a satirist. He poked fun at everybody. This particular story is basically and essentially a story of a practical joke. What makes it Halloween worthy is it's not the kind of joke where people all stand around at the end laughing and saying, "Oh, have you seen the look on your face when you look?" It's not that at all. At the end of this story, one person is laughing quietly and very inwardly. A few people are very confused, and one person is very, very scared. "My aunt will be down presently, Mr. Nuttall," said a very self-possessed young lady of 15. "In the meantime, you must try and put up with me." Frampton Nuttall endeavored to say the correct something which should duly flatter the niece of the moment without unduly discounting the aunt that was to come. Privately, he doubted more than ever whether these formal visits on a succession of total strangers would do much toward helping the nerve cure that he was supposed to be undergoing. "I know how it will be," his sister had said when he was preparing to migrate to this rural retreat. "You will bury yourself down there and not speak to a living soul, and your nerves will be worse than ever from moping. I shall just give you letters of introduction to all the people I know there. Some of them, as far as I can remember, were quite nice." Frampton wondered whether Mrs. Sappleton, the lady to whom he was presenting one of the letters of introduction, came into the nice division. "Do you know many of the people round here?" asked the niece when she judged that they had had sufficient silent communication. Hardly a soul," said Frampton. "My sister was staying here at the rectory, you know, some 4 years ago, and she gave me letters of introduction to some of the people here." He made the last statement in a tone of distinct regret. "Then you know practically nothing about my aunt?" pursued the self-possessed young lady. "Only her name and address," admitted the caller. He was wondering whether Mrs. Sappleton was in the married or widowed state. An undefinable something about the room seemed to suggest masculine habitation. "Her great tragedy happened just 3 years ago," said the child. "That would be since your sister's time." Her tragedy?" asked Frampton. Somehow, in this restful country spot, tragedy seemed out of place. "You may wonder why we keep that window wide open on an October afternoon," said the niece, indicating a large French window that opened onto a lawn. "Well, it is quite warm for the time of year," said Frampton. "But has that window got anything to do with the tragedy?" "Out through that window 3 years ago to a day, her husband and her 2 brothers went off for their day's shooting. They never came back. In crossing the moor to their favorite snipe shooting ground, they were all 3 engulfed in a treacherous piece of bog. It had been that dreadful wet summer, you know, and places that were safe in other years gave way suddenly, without warning. Their bodies were never recovered. That was the dreadful part of it." Here the child's voice lost its self-possessed note and became falteringly human. "Poor aunt always thinks that they will come back someday, they and the little brown spaniel that was lost with them, and walk in at that window just as they used to do. That is why the window is kept open every evening until it is quite dusk. Poor dear aunt, she has often told me how they went out, her husband with his white waterproof coat over his arm, and Ronnie, her youngest brother, singing, 'Bertie, why do you bound?' because he said it got on her nerves. Do you know, sometimes on still, quiet evenings like this, I almost get a creepy feeling that they all will walk in through that window." She broke off with a little shudder. It was a relief to Frampton when the aunt bustled into the room with a whirl of apologies for being late in making her appearance. "I hope Vera has been amusing you," she said. "She has been very interesting," said Frampton. "I hope you don't mind the open window," said Mrs. Sappleton briskly. "My husband and brothers will be home directly from shooting, and they always come in through this way. They've been out for snipe in the marshes today, so they'll make a fine mess over my poor carpets. So like you menfolk, isn't it?" She rattled on cheerfully about the shooting and the scarcity of birds and the prospects for duck in the winter. To Frampton, it was all purely horrible. He made a desperate but only partially successful effort to turn the talk to a less ghastly topic. He was conscious that his hostess was giving him only a fragment of her attention, and her eyes were constantly straying past him to the open window and the lawn beyond. It was certainly an unfortunate coincidence that he should have paid his visit on this tragic anniversary. The doctors agree in ordering me complete rest, an absence of mental excitement, and avoidance of anything in the nature of violent physical exercise. announced Frampton, who labored under the tolerably widespread delusion that total strangers and chance acquaintances are hungry for the least detail of one's ailments, infirmities, their cause and cure. On the matter of diet, they are not so much in agreement, he continued. No, said Mrs. Sappleton, in a voice which only replaced a yawn at the last moment. Then she suddenly brightened into alert attention, but not to what Frampton was saying. Here they are at last, she cried, just in time for tea, and don't they look as if they were muddy up to the eyes? Frampton shivered slightly and turned toward the niece with a look intended to convey sympathetic comprehension. The child was staring out through the window with a dazed horror in her eyes. In a chill shock of nameless fear, Frampton swung around in his seat and looked in the same direction. In the deepening twilight, 3 figures were walking across the lawn toward the window. They all carried guns under their arms, and one of them was additionally burdened with a white coat hung over his shoulders. A tired brown spaniel kept close at their heels. Noiselessly, they neared the house, and then a hoarse young voice chanted out of the dusk, I said, Bertie, why do you bound? Frampton grabbed wildly at his stick and hat. The hallway door, the gravel drive, and the front gate were dimly noted stages in his headlong retreat. A cyclist coming along the road had to run into the hedge to avoid imminent collision. Here we are, my dear, said the bearer of the white mackintosh, coming in through the window. Fairly muddy, but most of it's dry. Who was that who bolted out as we came up? A most extraordinary man, a Mr. Nuttall, said Mrs. Sappleton, could only talk about his illnesses and dashed off without a word of goodbye or apology when you arrived. One would think he had seen a ghost. I expect it was the spaniel, said the niece calmly. He told me he had a horror of dogs. He was once hunted into a cemetery somewhere on the banks of the Ganges by a pack of pariah dogs and had to spend the night in a newly dug grave with the creatures snarling and grinning and foaming just above him, enough to make anyone lose their nerve. Intrigue at short notice was her specialty.
Thank you all again so much for coming this evening. It has been so much fun. Just a quick note, after the concert, let's go immediately, for those of us participating in the costume contest, and I hope everyone who's dressed up will participate, we'll just go straight to that back corner and we'll hand out prizes, and then you can get more treats. We'll have a couple divisions, kids and adults, and etc. So, without further ado, the Toccata and Fugue in D minor, but with a very cool twist.